You know that feeling when something feels wrong, but you can't quite explain why? Like when you're out in the woods late at night and you can hear a twig snap behind you, but when you turn around, nothing's there? I didn't believe in that kind of stuff until I had this experience. Until that night in the treehouse. It all started when Tim called me up one summer evening around 7 p.m. Nothing unusual. Tim was my best friend. We grew up together. We'd been through all kinds of stupid stuff, from sneaking into movie theaters to hiking in places we probably shouldn't have. But that call? Something was off about it. "Hey, you free? I need to show you something. You gotta come over." At first I thought it was just him being dramatic, like always. Tim had this habit of building things up, making every little thing sound like a big deal. But I could hear something else in his voice, like a nervousness I'd never heard before. "Sure, I'll be over in 20 minutes, I said, trying to keep it casual. When we reached the treehouse, I stopped. It wasn't ours. The one Tim and his dad had built was a rickety little thing, barely big enough for us to sit in, but it had been our haven. This one, though, was huge, way bigger than anything we'd ever built. It was up high in the branches of a massive oak, its wooden floorboards warped with age, and the ropes were thick and weathered. Tim looked at me, his eyes wide. "I didn't build this," he whispered. "I swear, Mark, I didn't. I didn't know what to say." I stared up at it, trying to make sense of it. The treehouse looked ancient, like it had been there for decades, but I knew it hadn't. Tim's family had lived in that house for as long as I could remember, and I knew every inch of the woods around it. There was no way I'd ever missed a structure that big. The silence stretched out, thick and uncomfortable. Then we heard it. A soft knocking sound, like someone was tapping on the wood, slow, deliberate, one knock at a time. It stopped me in my tracks. My heart skipped a beat. I looked at Tim, who was staring up at the treehouse, his face blank, his body stiff. The tapping continued, 3 knocks, then a pause, then 3 more. Tim didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, frozen. "Tim," I said, my voice shaking a little more than I wanted to admit. "What the hell is that?" I don't know," he muttered, "but it's been happening every night. It started last week." I could feel my stomach drop. This wasn't like him. Tim wasn't the type to freak out over nothing, and I knew he wasn't lying. I could see it in his face, but I also didn't know what to make of it. It just didn't add up. Before I could say anything, he started walking toward the treehouse. "Wait, Tim," I called after him, my voice rising. "Don't go up there. We don't know what it is." But Tim didn't listen. He kept moving, one slow step after another, like he was drawn to it. I wanted to stop him, to grab his arm and drag him back, but something held me there. I couldn't explain it, some weird mix of curiosity and dread. Tim climbed the ladder first, the wooden rungs creaking under his weight. I stood at the base of the tree, watching, my heart pounding in my chest. When he reached the top, he stopped for a second, his body silhouetted against the sky. And then, the tapping stopped. It was like the whole forest went quiet, and I felt it then, the air, thick and heavy, pressing down on me. The last sound I heard before Tim screamed was the snap of a twig, sharp and clear. His voice came next, a jagged, strangled scream, full of pure, raw fear. "Mark, help! Oh God, please!" I froze, my breath caught in my throat. For a second I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring up at the opening of the treehouse. My mind raced. Should I climb up after him? Should I call someone? But before I could make any decision, Tim's scream ended abruptly. There was a terrible silence, a deep, suffocating quiet. I didn't even think. I just ran up the ladder, my hands slipping on the rungs as I climbed faster than I ever had in my life. When I reached the top, Tim was gone. I looked around frantically, but the treehouse was empty. The window was wide open, the wind picking up around the edges. The floorboards creaked like they hadn't been touched in years. "Tim?" I shouted, my voice trembling. "Tim, where are you?" There was no answer, no sound, nothing. I climbed through the window and into the treehouse, my heart pounding so loudly in my chest I thought it would burst. The air was cold now, different from the warmth we'd felt earlier. The place was empty, completely, eerily empty. But there, on the far side of the room, was something I'll never forget. A small piece of paper, crumpled up and stuck under the floorboard. I pulled it out with shaking hands, my breath hitching as I unfolded it. It was written in sloppy, barely legible handwriting. "They're watching. They don't leave. I heard them talking. The knocks are them. Please don't come." The words were fading like the ink had been there for years, but they were fresh, too fresh. I looked around, trying to piece it all together, but there was nothing. Tim was gone. To this day, I can't explain it. I don't know what happened to Tim. I don't know what that treehouse was or who wrote that note or why it felt like everything in those woods was trying to pull me in. But I can tell you this, that night something was there. And whatever it wasn't friendly. I never went back to that spot, and I don't recommend you do either. You know how sometimes you get that feeling in your gut, like something's just not right, but you can't put your finger on it? Like when you're walking down a dark street and you know there's nothing there, but your legs still get heavy, your heart starts pounding. That's how I felt when Tim called me that night. I should have listened to my instincts then, but I didn't. And now, I wish I had. It was late summer, August, I think, and the days were still sticky, thick with heat. I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through my phone, when the call came in from Tim. I knew it was him by the ringtone, something we'd set when we were kids, and too broke to buy a new song. He'd been my best friend since, well, forever. So when he called that night, I didn't think much of it. "Hey, you busy?" Tim's voice came through, a little strained. "Not really," I said, sitting up. "What's up?" "I need you to come over," he said quickly, almost in a rush. It's important." Okay. "Sure," I said, trying to keep the tone light. But there was something about the way he said it that made my stomach drop. "You good?" "I don't know, man," he muttered, sounding more nervous than I'd ever heard him. "It's the treehouse. There's something wrong. You need to see it." The treehouse. That took me by surprise. We built that thing when we were kids. It wasn't much, just some scrap wood, a few nails, a rope ladder, but it had been ours. We spent hours up there, pretending we were pirates or explorers or whatever we dreamed of. But after all these years, I figured it was just another relic of our childhood. Why was Tim bringing it up now? "You're gonna have to explain more than that, man," I said, my voice a little shaky now. Just come," Tim said, his voice small. "Please." Something about his tone told me he wasn't messing around, so I grabbed my keys and drove over to his house. When I pulled up, Tim was already standing on the porch, pacing back and forth, his hands wringing together like he couldn't sit still. He looked rough, like he hadn't been sleeping. "Tim," I said, rolling down the window, "you okay?" He glanced up at me, eyes wide. I don't know. It's just, I don't think we should be messing around with it anymore." "Messing around with what?" I asked, my confusion growing. I got out of the car and shut the door behind me. "The treehouse," he whispered again, looking over his shoulder like someone might hear us. "I don't know what's up there, but it's not right. I've been hearing things. At night. And, last night, I saw something. I wasn't buying it." Tim had always been the skeptic. If anything, he was the first to roll his eyes when someone told a ghost story or talked about creepy stuff in the woods. So hearing him talk like this, it was throwing me off balance. "Tim, man, you're freaking yourself out. It's probably just a raccoon or something." "I wish," he said, his voice thick with fear. "It's not an animal, it's something. I don't know. Now I'll admit it, I was starting to get weirded out." Tim had a way of talking when he was serious, and this wasn't the usual "I saw something spooky" stuff. There was real terror in his voice. "I need you to come with me," he said. I hesitated for a moment, but then I nodded. "All right, show me what you're talking about." We walked out behind his house, the warm air pressing in around us. The woods were quiet, too quiet. It was the kind of quiet that made your skin crawl. When we reached the clearing, I stopped dead. I hadn't been out to the treehouse in years, but there it was, looming above us. The ropes that hung down from the platform swayed lightly in the wind, creaking in that way they always did, but the whole thing felt off, like it had aged in the past few days. I couldn't explain it, but something about the place felt wrong. Tim didn't move for a second. He just stared up at it. "I've been hearing knocking," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It happens at night, when I'm trying to sleep. Just 3 knocks, like someone's knocking on the wood. It wakes me up." "3 knocks?" I laughed. "Come on, man, it's just your mind playing tricks on you." "No," Tim said, shaking his head. "It's not that. It's been happening every night. And last night I heard it from the treehouse. But I didn't hear anything else, just the knocks. like someone was trying to get in. That sent a chill down my spine. Even though I didn't want to believe him, the way he was standing there, shivering, looking up at the treehouse like it was a monster, I could see the fear in his eyes. "Let's go check it out," I said, trying to make light of it. I stepped toward the treehouse, but Tim grabbed my arm. His grip was tight, almost painful. "I don't want to go up there," he said. "Not alone. Please, Mark." I felt my throat tighten. It wasn't like Tim to beg me to do anything. "All right," I said, shaking my head. "Let's go." We both climbed the ladder to the platform. As I pulled myself up onto the floor of the treehouse, I felt it again, the air. It was thick, heavy. It felt like someone was watching us. I looked around. There was nothing out of the ordinary, just an old wooden floor, some broken planks, and the rope swings we'd abandoned years ago. But then I noticed something. On the far side of the treehouse, against the wall, was something dark. A patch of shadow that seemed wrong, like it didn't belong. "What the hell is that?" I said, my voice low. Tim was right behind me, and I felt him freeze. He didn't say anything, but I saw his eyes widen in terror. I turned slowly to look at him, and he looked more scared than I'd ever seen him. "I told you," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. "It's not just the knocking." Just then, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves around us. And then, there it was. A soft, almost imperceptible creak. I turned, my stomach dropping. The noise was coming from behind us, from the far corner of the treehouse, but there was nothing there. We waited. And then, the knocking started again. Knock, knock, knock. 3 sharp, deliberate knocks. The sound cut through the air like a knife. I felt my heart race. "Tim, we need to get out of here," I said, my voice trembling. But Tim didn't move. He just stood there, staring into the shadows. I grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the ladder. "Tim, we need to go, now!" But before we could even reach the ladder, the sound came again, louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. It was too much. I didn't care what it was. I was out of there. We didn't stop running until we were back at Tim's front door. I barely even looked back. The next day, Tim told me he didn't want to go back to that treehouse, and I didn't either. I don't know what we heard that night. I don't know who or what was knocking from up there. But whatever it wasn't something I ever want to see again. I don't know if it was just our minds playing tricks on us. But there's one thing I know for sure. Some things shouldn't be disturbed. It was one of those nights you'll never forget, but wish you could. You know the type, when you don't realize how much trouble you're in until it's too late. That's how it was when Jordan called me. I hadn't heard from him in months, not since we'd gone our separate ways after high school. He was always the type to stay in touch with the people who mattered, but, well, life happens. Anyway, it was a Thursday night. I was sitting in my apartment watching the game when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. At first I thought it was spam or something, but I picked it up. "Hello? Nate?" Jordan's voice came through, shaky, like something had rattled him. "Yeah, man, what's up? I need you to come over, now!" His words were clipped, rushed. That's when I knew something wasn't right. "Jordan, what's going on?" He didn't answer right away. I could hear him breathing on the other end. There was a lot of noise, like he was pacing back and forth. Finally, he said, "It's the treehouse. I don't know how to explain this, but you need to see it. Please, Nate." The treehouse. I hadn't thought about it in years. We built that thing when we were kids. It was a mess, honestly, just some scrap wood nailed together, a rope ladder, a makeshift floor. But for us, it was our spot. It was where we hung out, where we felt safe. "Dude, it's just a treehouse," I said, trying to laugh it off. "What are you talking about?" "No, man, I'm serious. Something's up there. And I can't go up there anymore." I'd known Jordan long enough to hear the fear in his voice, and when he said that, I knew it wasn't some joke. "All right, I'll come over. Just hang tight," I said, grabbing my keys off the counter. It wasn't far, about a 20-minute drive to his place. When I got there, the air felt different, not in a good way. The house sat on the edge of town, close to the woods, and there was a quiet that almost felt suffocating. The kind of silence where you feel like you're being watched, but you can't tell by who or what. I knocked on the door and Jordan opened it almost immediately, looking a little too eager, a little too frantic. "Thanks for coming," he said, pulling me inside. His face was pale, his eyes wide, like he hadn't slept in days. "All right, man, what's going on?" He didn't answer. Instead, he just nodded toward the back door. I followed him out. The path to the treehouse was overgrown with weeds, the trees too thick for the moonlight to cut through properly. It felt like we were walking through a tunnel of shadows. Every now and then, I heard something in the woods, maybe a squirrel or a bird, but it wasn't normal. Everything felt wrong. We reached the treehouse in silence. As we stood there, the breeze picked up, but it didn't feel cool. It felt heavy. Jordan stood back, looking at the rope ladder. I don't want to go up there, man. You go first." "Why?" "You said it's fine," I said, trying to keep the mood light, but my voice came out flat. He didn't respond right away. He just stared at the ladder as if it was something that wasn't supposed to be there. "I hear things up there. And it's not just at night, it's like someone's up there with me, watching me." I didn't know what to say to that. I thought he was messing with me, but when I looked at his face, I realized he wasn't. I climbed the ladder, the old rope creaking under my weight, and made my way onto the platform. The treehouse hadn't changed much, except it looked neglected, cobwebs in the corners, dust thick on the floorboards. But it wasn't the mess that bothered me. It was the smell, something sharp, acrid, like rotting wood mixed with something else. Jordan's footsteps creaked behind me. I didn't say anything at first, just stood there, taking in the space. That's when I noticed it, the markings on the wall near the window. It looked like someone had carved something into the wood. At first, I thought it was just random scratches, maybe from animals. But as I moved closer, I saw something disturbing. Patterns, deep and deliberate, crisscrossing in a way that made my stomach drop. I could feel Jordan behind me, standing just outside the doorway. "Did you do this?" I asked, my voice tight. "No." His voice cracked. "I haven't touched it in months. I don't even go up here anymore." I took another step forward, feeling the floorboard shift under my foot. Then I noticed something else. A crate pushed up against the wall. The kind of crate you'd see in an old storage shed. It wasn't there the last time I visited. I reached for it instinctively, but then I heard it. A noise. Not loud, but enough to make my heart race. A shuffling sound followed by something else. A low, guttural murmur. I froze. Jordan stepped up behind me, his voice barely a whisper. "I hear it too. I couldn't move. I didn't want to move." The sounds were getting louder. They were coming from the walls. No, not from the walls. From under the floorboards. Something was scratching, tapping, like it was trying to get out. "Jordan, we need to leave," I said, my voice shaking. But before we could even move, the rope ladder snapped. The sound was deafening. We both turned toward the opening, and I felt my chest tighten. It was too dark out there. Something was waiting. I could feel it. "Get down!" Jordan shouted, already scrambling for the edge. But I didn't follow him, not at first. Something made me stay. A figure standing at the base of the treehouse wasn't there before. I swear I saw it, standing still like it was waiting for us to notice. It was too dark to make out any details, but I could feel its presence, looming, heavy. My heart hammered in my chest. That was enough, I didn't even think. I scrambled down the ladder, my hands shaking as I tried to keep my balance. By the time I hit the ground, Jordan was already halfway back to the house. We didn't speak the rest of the way back. I could feel the cold grip of fear all over me, suffocating. We didn't look back, but I know Jordan feels it too. He hasn't been back to the treehouse since, and neither have I. But whenever I drive past his house, I can't help but glance toward the woods, and I can't help but feel like something's still up there, watching, waiting. I don't think I'll ever understand what happened, but I know this. There's something out there, something in those woods, and I don't ever want to find out what it is. I'm not going to lie. This is one of those things I've been trying to forget for years. But for whatever reason, it came back to me tonight. And I guess I guess I should finally tell someone about it. It started with a phone call. No big deal, right? You get a call from an old friend, you pick up. But this wasn't like any other call. It had been almost a decade since I last heard from Matt. We were kids, neighbors, stuck in that awkward phase where you weren't quite friends, but you weren't enemies either. You know the kind. And like most people, we grew apart as we got older. School, jobs, life, all of that. But one night, out of nowhere, I get this message from him. No explanation. No, hey, how's it going? Just a simple, urgent, Jake, I need you to come over. It's about the treehouse. I had to blink when I read that. I don't know why, but it hit me like a punch to the stomach. That damn treehouse. I hadn't thought about it in years. You know the kind of place I'm talking about. The one you build as a kid because you think it's going to be your little fortress, your escape from the world. Yeah, that one. We spent the whole summer building it. Even the adults didn't get it. Why we had to drag all those old planks up into that oak tree. Why we thought it was the greatest thing on earth. But we did. It was ours. And the thing is, it was never really meant to be just a place to hide. Something happened that summer. Something that, well, I didn't realize how much it affected me until much later. So, anyway, I'm driving to Matt's place that night, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. His house was on the edge of town, surrounded by trees, really isolated. When I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. Like the air was too thick or something. No crickets chirping, no wind rustling the leaves, just a weird silence. It didn't hit me then, but it should have. I rang the doorbell, nothing, so I knocked. Still nothing. I tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. I wasn't sure what to do at that point, but then I heard it, a sound. It was soft at first, like footsteps in the grass. It came from the backyard. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I couldn't just stand there, so I walked around the house, and there he was. Matt. He was standing by the treehouse, staring up at it. Matt? I called, trying to keep it casual. He didn't respond, not at first. Matt, I said again, stepping closer. You good, man? He turned to me, his face pale, eyes wide. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, like something was eating him alive. I don't know how to explain it, he said, his voice low and shaky, but it's not right. I've been hearing things. I don't think we're alone. I looked up at the treehouse. It looked like it always had, old, worn down with boards that creaked in the wind. Nothing out of the ordinary, but for some reason when Matt said that, something stirred deep in my chest. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I knew something wasn't right. I tried to laugh it off. Matt, come on, it's just the wind, right? That treehouse has been there for years. But he just shook his head, his eyes fixed on the ladder leading up to the treehouse. You don't get it, he whispered. I hear it moving, every night. Something's up there. I didn't know what to say. It wasn't like Matt to get worked up over nothing, but there was something about his tone, something so raw and genuine that made me hesitate. I glanced at the treehouse again. It seemed so normal, but then, I swear, I saw something move in the window. Just a flicker. I shook it off. All right, Matt, you're freaking yourself out. It's just a treehouse, man. But even as I said it, I knew I was lying. Something felt wrong. The air was thick, the night unusually quiet, like the world itself was holding its breath. Please, Matt said, his voice cracking. You have to go up there. You have to see it for yourself. I don't know what made me agree. Maybe it was the desperation in his voice, or maybe it was the dread creeping up my spine. But I found myself walking toward the treehouse, Matt's eyes burning into my back. I grabbed the ladder. It creaked under my weight as I climbed. The higher I went, the more I felt like I was stepping into something I shouldn't. When I reached the top, I stood there for a moment, just taking it all in. The treehouse looked just like I remembered it, old, weathered, but still standing. But then I saw it. Carved into the wooden wall, right by the window, was a word. Help. It wasn't just scratched on there, it was carved deep, like someone had been trying to carve their way out. I froze. My heart was pounding in my chest. It didn't make sense. How could something like that happen? Who would do that? And then I heard it. A soft rustle. It came from behind me, from the other side of the treehouse. I turned, my stomach flipping over itself, but there was nothing there. The floorboards creaked again. I whipped around, expecting to see someone standing there. but it was empty. I don't know how long I stood there, but it felt like hours. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing and hearing. There was something here, something wrong. I scrambled down the ladder so fast I nearly tripped. Matt was still standing by the base of the tree, his face ashen. "Did you see it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I couldn't speak. I just nodded. And then we did something we probably shouldn't have. We left. Neither of us said a word as we walked back to the house. The silence between us was heavy, thick with the weight of whatever we had just witnessed. I don't know what happened that night, but something in that treehouse, something in the air, felt like it was waiting, watching. I still don't know what it was. And honestly, I don't want to. But I can't shake the feeling that whatever it was, it's still there.